Hi and welcome to PolyOriginals with Fiona Abel-Smith. So today we're going to have a fun session. I'm going to do a little tutorial to show you how to make this particular cane, which you can then put into all of these different patterns, and then show you how to turn that into a nice pendant with a fun back, so you can make that into a necklace or anything else you want to do. So let's get started and take you through what you need to do today's project. So the equipment we need for today's session is fairly straightforward. You need a polymer clay blade. I sometimes refer to these as tissue blades. A little craft knife. A small roller. It's quite handy in size. This one's about the size of a finger. A small knitting needle, or it's actually a cable needle, just something with not a pointed end, and we're just going to use the end of this to roll across something, and we're also going to use the diameter of this just to press down into the clay to make a nice imprint. You're going to need either some liquid clay, which I've just decanted into a bottle here, or some PVA glue and a small paintbrush just to be able to paint that on around the side of our piece. To work on when I'm putting the Kaleidoscope together, I'm just using a little piece of this is baking sheet, ones that can go in the oven, but baking parchment, to be honest, a sheet of paper that size will do for what we're doing today, just something that is easily movable to work on. We are going to use an extruder, and on that the disc or the die we're going to use in the extruder is one with relatively small holes. They're about a couple of millimetres wide, these ones, so not the smallest ones, but probably the next ones up on most people's sets of extruders. If you don't have an extruder, you can simply just roll the clay by hand, and we're sort of going about that sort of size. So if you put it down there, you can see this is a 1 inch measuring sheet. You can see the sort of size, and you can just roll that by hand instead if you don't have an extruder. To make our silver bit around the outside, I'm going to use this particular brand, Goldfinger. It's a form of gilder's paste. Other gilder's paste will work just as well. If you don't have any of this, then mica powder or the micro glitter will work well, and if you don't have any of those, then just a little bit of actual silver coloured polymer clay will work. But for me, it doesn't quite give the shine that the other effects give, and I'll come on to that later on as we go through the tutorial. You will also need just a small strip of paper, so just ordinary white paper. As you can see, not overly long, but it's the width that's the important bit. Now this is actually 1/2 centimetre wide, or about 1/5 of an inch, and we just use that to measure when we come to cutting our piece later on. It's just a very handy tool to have, just a small strip of paper. Depending on the finish on the back of your piece, you will either need a couple of small jump rings, and we'll inset those in to make it into a pendant, or if you don't have those, then you can get a couple of these very small eyelet screws, and the thickness of our piece is just about right that with a screwdriver, a little drill bit, you can actually put these into the back of the piece instead. As always, I will work when I'm measuring the size of my cane, which is very important to get that exact when we're doing kaleidoscopes. This one is the one that I use a lot. It's freely downloadable from www.printablepaper.net, and I've simply laminated it for ease of use so I can use it multiple times. Other than that, you'll need some aluminium foil to tent your piece in when you're working. Some form of rounded mould that I'm going to just put the piece on to give it a nice rounded form. This is just a smallish hemisphere mould. You can buy these online. If you haven't got one of these, one of the old-fashioned light bulbs works really well as long as it's spent and finished. You can always use that to go around. You can sometimes find nice round spoons that will work, or of course the bottom of an empty drinks can. If you look at that, it's got a nice concave, and if you chop off the bottom and carefully wrap the sides so you don't hurt yourself, then you can always use that as something to use as a mould. But we're putting our piece around one of those. Other than that, we'll be using wet wipes and tissues to clean our piece, and if you don't like using wet wipes, then just some wetted tissues will do, or a wetted piece of material, and as always a pasta machine dedicated to polymer clay use. So that's all the tools we'll need. So now let's move on to the clays for today's session. So for today's project, I'm using Fimo Soft polymer clay, but all well-known brands of polymer clay will work well for this project. And the sizes I'm using are way more than you need to create just a single pendant. But when you're creating a kaleidoscope cane, it's good to have a large amount of clay so you can manipulate the shape. So this will give you enough to make an awful lot of pendants, or a few pendants, and lots of other fun things as well. So the sizes I've gone for and the colours I've gone for are the peppermint blue, the apple green, the plum, which I sometimes refer to as purple because I don't know how it comes out on screen, but to me it's very purpley coloured, brilliant blue, white, and the Windsor blue, which is a nice dark blue. So this is going to be our accent colour and also the colour for the underneath of the pendant. The white, most of this is going to be used to make up into Skinner blends, but this larger lump is going to be used just to make sort of extra colours in. So the amounts we're using today in all of these, we've got ½ an ounce of the colours or 14 grams, and on these two we've got 1½ ounces or 42 grams. And what I've done is I've split them up. So this is how you need to do them. So the larger ½ ounce block of the white I've split into 4 equal pieces, and all of these colours I've split into 2. So you end up with half of your original amount, and that's going to make 1, 2, 3, 4 individual Skinner blends. These ones are all going to be conditioned separately and they'll be used as extra little bits of colour to add into the inserts. The blue is the outside colour and the outliner colour for most of the canes, but also used as extra added bits, and we also need extra to do the underneath and to do the extruding as well. And the white will be done as a separate sheet, again just to add extra bits of accent and colour in as we go. So condition all of your clays in these individual amounts. So obviously they'll still be done in individual amounts even though they're going to go together as Skinner blends. If you are at all unsure about conditioning polymer clay, then I do have a video with a few tips and techniques and telling you why you need to do it, and I'll put a link to that in the details below this video. So I'll go and get all this conditioned and I'll bring you back when I'm done. So I've conditioned all the clay in the separate blocks, and all of these colours and the white I've put through on setting number 4 on my pasta machine to give myself thinnish sheets. So it's a medium setting on my machine where 0 is thick and 9 is thin, and the blue I've done on a thinner setting, so I've actually put the dark blue, which is going to be my surround colour, through on setting number 7 of my machine. So all conditioned and all nicely done. Now the large piece of white goes off to one side, and 1 each of all of these colours goes off to one side. So we are left with 1 colour, a matching bit of white, and again the blue goes off to one side. So what we're now going to do with all of these is make Skinner blends, so 4 little individual Skinner blends. Make them one at a time. If you're unsure on how to do a Skinner blend, I do have a tutorial giving you lots of tips and techniques on how to do that, and I'll put a link to that in the video description below this video. So I'm going to do the green for you. So all the rest of these I'll put to one side and I'll do those in a minute. So we've got roughly oblong shapes. Don't worry about them being over neat, because if you've done any Skinner blends, you know that all sort of comes out and sorts itself out as you put the blends together. And all I've done is cut down a diagonal line, twisted them over so that both halves match one on top of the other, and then turn one upside down and put the diagonal lines together. So I'm going to end up with all green on one side and going more and more and more and more of a blend through until all white on the other side. And because I've now got these layers and I'm not going to roll them, all I'm going to do is fold that in half, and then I'll put it through the pasta machine, fold side first, and keep putting it through, collecting it in my hand, folding bottom to top, putting through, fold side first, until I end up with a nice blend, all green on one side, down to white on the other. And as I say, if you want any tips or techniques how to do this, just look at the video I've done on Skinner blends. So because we've got 4 layers, I'm going to put this through on a thicker setting of my pasta machine. So I'm going to do setting number 2, and I'm going to leave it on that setting the whole time I do the blend, and I'll bring you back when I've got that blend completed. So here's our blend, and it's gone sort of quite a nice width. To keep it nice and short, I just made sure I kept it pressed up against the end of the pasta machine. And what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to fold that in half. I'm going to put it back through the pasta machine on setting number 2 to give myself a nice longer piece. And once that's done, I'm going to put it back through, green end first, on my thinnest usable setting, which on my machine happens to be setting number 9. And what I'll do before I put it through, I'll just turn the handle a couple of times in the normal clockwise direction, just to make sure that any trapped mess underneath escapes, and any that does come through will only go on the darker end, not on the lighter end. So there we go, there's our nice thin strip of polymer clay, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to concertina this backwards and forwards on itself, trying to make sure as I do so that I'm not trapping any air in the side folds, and I'm doing that probably about 3/4 of an inch, 2 centimetres wide. When I've finished, it's always quite uneven, so I'm just going to press down on the ends, turn over and press down, and with my fingers just make it into more of a sort of a rectangular box shape, something along those lines. So there's the green. I've already done the turquoise, the blue and the purple. So we have there our 4 Skinner blends, and they are going to form the main part of our polymer clay cane. So the first element we're going to do is be quite a large one. So what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to put 2 of those blends together. And then having done that, I'm just going to curve off the sides, because I want this to be a slightly rounder shape. So curve it to start with, then give it a roll, and it's now a nice rounded shape but quite long. I want it probably to be about half this length, because we're going to add an extra addition into the middle of this, so we want this nice and short so it makes it easy to add the addition. So just with the heel part of my thumb or hand, I'm just going to press down, flatten that out till it's about that height and more of a round shape. And we're going to add an extra piece in the middle of this, and I'm going to add that in the colour of turquoise or the peppermint. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to tear off a bit of this and roll this into a log, and I'm going to make it roughly the same height as my piece. And what I want to do, I want to add a little bit of a dot inside. So I'm just teaching you some techniques here of how to add things in. So what we're going to do, we're going to chop as evenly as we can down there to get 2 equal pieces. If you find when you've cut it it's uneven, just put it back together, roll it again until you end up with a nice even piece. We're going to take our cable needle, create a little groove in both pieces, and then taking a little bit of our dark blue. So I've just pulled a piece off from the sheet we've conditioned. I'm just going to roll this up nice and tight so there's no air trapped inside. And I'm going to roll a piece that's thin enough to fit in there. Just pop it in one side, take off the end, and when you put the 2 parts together, you now have a little dot sat in the middle. So to make sure you've got no air trapped inside, starting in the middle, squeeze in and then work towards the ends. Give it a bit of a roll, where you want to squash it down slightly. Again, make sure it's the right height for what we are doing. We're now going to take our sheet of the outline dark blue colour, and I'm going to cut a piece that's the right height to wrap around this little inner bit. Cut away the excess, and what we're then going to do is we're going to cut with green at one end and blue at the other end, cut straight down the middle. Again, hopefully getting 2 even parts, and this time we're going to create a groove for this to sit in, and we're going to create a groove with our small roller. So again, just press down, give a roll, don't worry about these bits opening up, that happens, and then I'm just going to just very gently change this into a slightly diamond shape because it just sits into the gap better. I'm going to have the green towards the bottom, so because we'd already cut that to size, we can just add a little bit of blue just on the bottom there, put our 2 pieces back together, and now you have a nice little insert of that inside the rest of the cane. The next thing to do is to wrap the whole piece in a bit of the blue. So again, cut a piece that's the right width, starting from the bottom, just gently make sure and persuade it to fit all the way around the outside, make sure there's no air trapped in the meantime. Cut off any excess. And there we have our nice first part of our cane. What we're going to do this, we want to make this twice as long because we want this to go into 2 pieces, and we want these to make a nice triangular point. So I'm going to make sit that on its side, so it's that way down against the tile, and I'm going to create a point along this edge by just pressing up. Okay, so pressing that down, just press along till you end up with a triangular shape. You see it starting to come there? And as you press in, so I'm pressing it longer, and we're reducing this cane, and we're going to reduce this till it's about 3 inches in length. Now I'm keeping this very much with a right angle. Can you see here? This is a right angle. So I'm very aware when I've got it sat flat on the tile that this bit's going straight up, and when I do it in the reverse, this bit's going straight up. And when you've got it flat along there, you can see it's much wider, and I'm making sure I'm keeping it nice and even all the way that I go. So I'm just going to take off the messy ends. You don't need to do that, I'm just doing that just because it's easier to show you when I'm doing an online tutorial. Cut down the even middle bit, and then we're going to put it together with the shorter sides together. So we're doing that because this is going to be the point of our triangle on the cane, so we want these sides to go up slightly. But at the moment we're just putting it together like that. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take a layer of the white, a layer of the green, making sure it's big enough to fit over our piece, and then a layer of the blue. With all 3 layers in place, I'm just going to roughly chop down. This is actually going to be the other way up. Use the side of your blade to check where you're chopping down here, and quickly pull all these pieces apart because you don't want the colours to stick to each other. Flip that the other way up, and it should sit nicely on top of your piece. And what we're going to do now is we need to change this, because at the moment this is still a right angle. We need to change this to make it a shallower angle. So with my finger just in place here, I'm just using my finger there, making sure the points stuck nicely together whilst I'm pressing up around the sides to create more of a curve in the middle here. And for those of you who like your maths or like your angles, I'm looking to get a roughly 60-degree angle here. But you don't have to be exact. Something along those lines is absolutely fine, and that's our first piece done. So put him to one side and we'll move on to piece number 2. So for the next part we're going to use the peppermint or turquoise polymer clay, and we're going to create a groove in the middle of this one by pressing down with our roller. Then we're going to choose another colour to create a roll to put in the middle. So for this one I'm going for the purple. So I'm going to pull about half of that away, same as we did before. Take a little bit of your white. You could use the blue, but I'm working on the basis that the white's going to be a better contrast in the middle of this one. Exactly the same before. Put it in, close that up and press from the middle to make sure you have got no trapped air inside. Find your dark blue. Just wrap this in one layer. And roll it until it's the right length to sit inside. As soon as it is, with your fingers, just press up to create a triangular shape. Take your blue and again cut a piece that's going to go all the way around the outside. and just wrap that all the way around the outside of your piece. Trim away the excess. And now you want to reduce this until it is 4.5 inches, about 12 centimetres in length. So again, just for the purposes of the tutorial, I'm going to chop off the distorted ends, but if I was doing this by myself at home, I would just leave those in place. So we end up with 3 pieces that look a bit like that, and then with my finger I'm just going to curve the end away from the inserted bit. Pinch that closed. You find that tends to spread, so I'm just going to push that back down till it's straighter. And repeat with the other 2. And then put them together so you've got 2 purple ends with the inserts on one side, and this one is just going to sit inside. Now we've got little bits of a gap, so we've got a little bit of a triangular gap in between those 2 bits, and the same here. So taking a little bit of your dark blue, or any other colour you want, so I'm going to stick to the dark blue. I'm just going to roll it into a long log, press down to create a triangular shape, and then insert it into that gap, pinch off the excess, insert it and pinch off. And that is our second element done, and that's going to sit in another corner. So this is our first bit, and this is going to be the largest size piece, because that's going to take up probably 2/3 of the triangle, but this piece will sit here to create another corner of the triangle. And now what we need to do is to make our piece to sit into this side of the triangle. So our final piece is the skin and blend we've done with the purple or plum colour into white. So what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to make a point and create this into a triangle, and at the point where the white bit is, pull it up and then press it down so that the whole piece is triangular in shape. So don't extend it too much, just work on creating that triangular shape. Once we've done whatever length you've got, I've probably got just under 2 inches there, you can chop that in half so you can see what you've got. And I am going to, with my round of my roller, create an indent in both sides, only half the way in, but we're going to do another little insert. So do that side and do that side, and what you should be left with is an area where the circle or an insert is going to go. So we'll gather up the rest of the green that we've got left. It's exactly the same as we've done before. Roll it, create a stub-ended sausage by pressing down, cut down through the middle of it, open it out, create those grooves, again either with white or with a little bit of the blue, because that's a light colour I'm going to use a little bit of the blue. Just create a small log that will fit into one side, fit him in, put the other side on as before, press in the middle, press upwards to make sure there's no air trapped. And I think with this one, because where you've got the green, if the green's right next to the purple, it can create a sort of a brown look. So I'm just going to wrap this green in a layer of white and then a layer of the dark blue. So exactly as we've done before, just cut it to size, wrap it around, first in the white and then in a layer of the dark blue. Pop it inside, chop off any excess, and as you can see there, I wasn't being too neat or too worried about the size or the shape, because what I'm going to do now is that underneath I'm going to cover in just a layer of the dark blue. Now not the whole way down, I'm going to go halfway up this side, all the way over the top, and a little way down that side. We're then going to press down so that this bit becomes flat and this bit becomes the point of a triangle. So simply press down, and then we are, as before, going to reduce this by pulling it longer and pushing in at the same time to create a longer piece of patterned clay. When you're at a stage you like, I'm just going to pinch in the bottom to make that smaller, to make it easier to put two parts together. I'm going to chop in half, put those two pieces together, and then I'm going to repeat that one more time, making that flat, this a point, cut in half till I've got 4 little inserts showing in my clay. The tops usually spread apart, so when I press the bottoms flat, that's fine. Do the bottoms first, and then just pull the tops together. Then you've got your triangular shape, so just reduce as before. So I reduce that to it's about 3 inches in length, or 7.5 centimetres, so that when I chop down through and put your two pieces together, you have your final part of the cane. So you've got one triangle corner, that one there, and this one will fit somewhere along there. Now at the moment this angle's too wide, so I'm just going to press that narrower. And when you're doing this, make sure that whatever you do at the top end, you're doing the same at the bottom end, because you want it to be the same throughout your cane. That's a better angle. And then just look at the gaps you've got. So as you can see here, we've got a gap here, a gap here, a gap there, sort of a little gap here and a little gap here. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to take my leftover bits of colour, and I've got some of the blue as well, and I'm going to either make them into rolls or rounds and fill in the gap. Because I've got a lot of blue and the white, it might be nice to do a Skinner blend of these two, and then I can fit a Skinner blend into this large bit here. And I might do a little bullseye cane, so just wrapping one colour around another to fit into that gap there, and the rest I will just make up with plain colours. So I'll fast forward through that, because that, obviously you can see what I'm going to do as I do it, and that'll take us to the stage where we've got a nice relatively triangular shaped cane, which is at the stage at which we'll start to reduce it. Rather than have a single bullseye cane, I'm going to reduce this till it's twice the length I need, cut it in half and put the two bits together. Okay, so this bit's going to fit in here. So always make sure you look at both the top and the bottom when you're doing it. And in here we've got this triangular shape, so I've made an extra Skinner blend, and I'm going to make it so it's roughly the right size to fit in. Still got a bit of gap down there, so I'm going to take a little bit of the blue and backfill with the blue. You'll normally find it's either a triangular, round or square shape, so just make whatever you need to fit in the gap. And don't worry about filling the gaps completely, because as we reduce this, so a lot of the gaps will go. And then we've got a bit of a gap in here, so I'm going to fill some with blue and a little bit with white. And I know from experience, having done a lot of kaleidoscope canes, that's all you need, just a rough triangular shape. The rest will all merge and move together, and that's what makes kaleidoscopes so great. You never know quite what you're going to get when you come out. But as long as you've got the same pattern on one side that you have on the other, then it'll all look fine. So now what we want to do is to reduce this triangle cane until it's small enough for what we want to do. So we're going to reduce it by pressing in the sides here. So you can either do this when it's sat on your tile, in which case with my fingers I will just press in the middle to start with, rotate it and press in. Now of course if you've got cane caps, cane savers, any of those things that are online, I will put links to them in the details below the video, then they are very good to use. But I do actually like quite a lot of scrap clay. I use a lot of scrap clay in most of what I do, so it never worries me overly much about using them. And there are ways of minimising the amount of scrap clay you get as well, as with the cane savers and the cane caps. One of the things I do is when I've done that, and you can see that I'm starting to create a bit of a waste on the middle, I will then put it flat on my tile, and when it's flat on the tile I will actually pull the ends down all the way around, so where they've come up they then go down and meet. And I will carry on doing that, just working on this waste effectively until I reduce the cane quite a bit. So I'll just do this side and then show you where we've got. So you can see there I'm starting to reduce this end quite a bit more than this end. So having done that, I'll turn it on the other end and do this end as well. You can see you've got quite a bit of a groove there, so this is the stage at which I want to then pull out this top bit to make it more even, and then start working further down. And I will carry on doing that until I've got it to a length probably about that wide, and once I've done that then I will turn it on its side and start working by pressing in down the sides. So I will do all of that. I will actually keep the whole process in, but obviously speed it up because you don't want to just sit there and watch me doing this. But I won't cut it at all, so this literally will be the process from beginning to end of me reducing this cane. And of course you can slow the video down if you want to at all using your settings on YouTube. So I will stop talking and carry on reducing. So once I've got it to about 1.5 inches across each of these faces, I will stop, because I'm only going to take a part of this now and reduce that to make the pendant that I'm going to show you in today's project. But obviously you can make this whatever size you like, keep it large, reduce it down, so just keep one bit to one side if you want to do what we're doing today, and we're just going to use one part. So I'm probably going to chop off about 1/3, and this is the moment of truth, the moment when we see for the first time what we've created. So there you go, that's the pattern that way up, that's the pattern that way up, and that's the pattern that way up. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take this one piece and I'm going to reduce this down, and I will have some distortion on the end, so I'm going to take off a chunk of that already, but not too much, because if you take it off until the pattern's correct, when we carry on reducing it we're going to get more distortion. So only take off a little bit, and then the whole of the rest of this I'm going to carry on reducing until I've got a nice even amount of just 1 inch width, 2.5 centimetres across each of these faces. So what we're looking for is a piece that's nice, the same width across each side, which I've done to 1 inch. Have a look down the sides, make sure you haven't got any in too much of an inward curve where you've been pressing your fingers down. If you have, then just try and sort of press down to minimise that. And all I'm going to do at the moment is I'm going to set it nicely on my measuring sheet, put it down in such a way so that I know it's nicely down on that 1 inch size, and then I'm going to chop off the end so I've got a nice flat end to start with. And then if you can, just leave it for a little while. We're just going to leave it to set and rest. If you haven't got the patience for that, then that's fine, just keep cutting away. But I am going to leave mine so that when I take slices, this is all rested, so I can take nice even slices and get the least distortion possible. So I'll bring you back when I've let that rest for about an hour or so. When you cut starting slices, it doesn't matter what size you cut. It's more important for each one to be the same as opposed to being thick or thin. But for what I'm doing today, I'm going probably for about 3mm per slice. I'm going to try and get each slice as near to each other as possible, and I'm going to cut 6 slices. Now, you'll notice that I have actually been very neat in this point. Other parts you don't need to be quite so neat, but if you want to get a really good kaleidoscope and do the least amount of manipulation when you're putting those slices together, then do, as I said, make sure each side is the same length and make sure you've got even amount all the way down. And then all you're going to do with your tissue blade or polymer clay blade, holding it quite nice and tight on both sides into the middle, just going to very carefully take 6 slices off. And because we've got a triangular shape, and as long as your blade is nice and sharp, we shouldn't get too much distortion on just taking those 6 slices. Once you've got your slices, we're just going to pick them up one at a time and then just put them together so that the patterns match. And when you're doing this, you want to actually put them together and watch for all the bits. So where this bit is joining up, that's something I'm going to look at carefully. Where the purples are joining, I'm going to look at that carefully. And I'm going to try and make sure it sits nice and flat on each piece. Now, when I'm holding these, I'm holding it as gently as I possibly can, so touching it but almost not touching it. And if you get used to doing that, you can actually manipulate this and put the slices together just like that, just like this, with nothing else behind them. However, I have been doing this for a long time and I'm very used to putting my slices together. So if you have any problems at all, just take a little bit of scrap clay. I've put this through on a thinnish setting, setting number 5, although you can go through if you want. And what you could do as an alternative is to place your pieces on a piece of scrap clay so it's holding them there, and then manipulate them and put them into place and let the underneath clay hold them in place for you. So that's another option. When you've got 3 pieces together, just make sure that they're nicely flat. So with the blunt end of my blade, keeping my fingers well away from the sharp bit, I would just very gently press that to make sure it's nice and even. And luckily my pieces are, and that's a sign of whether your triangles are even. If they all fit together in a nice straight line, then you know you've done an even slicing. And then we'll start putting these ones together. So that one will fit there, so I'm going to keep that one that way up so that I can put these 3 together in the same way. So if you find that your slices don't mix, you can just pull it slightly. So I'm just pulling that one just fractionally so that it does meet together in that point. And that's what I'm looking for every time I add something in, is making sure that my slices meet together nice and neatly and adjust as is needed. And this is when I will start working on one of these sheets of baking parchment or just plain paper, just so that when I pick these up in exactly the same way as if you're working on a piece of clay, I'm going to let it sit nicely on this so that I can then match up perfectly these pieces. Push them gently together, and there you have your first kaleidoscoped piece. So the next stage is with the side of something like this cable needle, just very gently run down where the joins are, pushing from one side to the other, filling up any gaps, making sure there's no distortion, all the while keeping an eye on any of the critical points like this, where the patterns really match. Now I have got one slice here which is much higher than the slice down there, so I'm going to do something about that in just a minute. But before I do, I'm just going to do the same for these corner pieces, just making sure that the sides match up nicely. And then where that one piece is slightly higher, just take your tissue blade and you can very gently just shear off a little bit of the excess to make sure that it meets nicely next to the pattern. That's also something to do quite often when it meets in the middle. If you roll your needle towards the middle down each of the seams, you will quite often get a little bit of a raised lump right in the middle, and again all you do is then take your tissue blade and very carefully just shave off any raised up lump. So the last thing we're going to do is to make sure that the sides are nice and even. So again, either with the blunt end of your blade or with something like a piece of wood or side of a metal ruler, you can just very carefully just push up against the flat side to make sure that the sides are nice and neat. With a nice clean roller, I will go from each side towards the middle, just to make sure that all of that slice is nicely adhered to the next door slices. And to make sure I've got no marks or indentations, because we want this to be as pristine as possible, because I don't want to have to spend any time sanding or polishing this. When you're all done, take your piece off, find your bowl or your mould, whatever you're planning on baking on, centre the piece on top, and very gently, so as not to leave any fingerprints, just press your polymer clay down onto the bowl. You can always go back if you want to, again with the blunt side of your blade, just to make sure that it's all nice and square. Make sure that all the pieces are nicely pressed down, and if you have done any indents or anything, again just give it a slight roll over. Have a look at the surface, because there you don't want to be spending time sanding and polishing if you don't have to. When it's completely done and you're ready, just take a small piece of aluminium foil, just tent the whole piece in foil, making sure the foil doesn't press into the bit at the top, and bake according to the manufacturer's instructions for the brand of clay you are using. And what I'll do next is, of course, that was one pattern, but with our design we're going to have 3 patterns. So I'll just quickly do all 3 patterns to show you what else you will get from this one cane. So these are actually the 3 different patterns you will get from putting the kaleidoscope or the triangles together in a different format. This is obviously the one we've used and that's baking at the moment, and these are putting it together in the other direction. So you can see you get 3 very distinct patterns just from the one cane. But whilst that is all baking, take your last piece of the dark coloured clay, the one we're going to use as the accent colour at the back, and I've put this through, conditioned it nicely, put it through on setting 2 on my pasta machine, so a nice thick setting. I'm also going to use a little bit extra, which I'm going to put through the extruder, so just to give me a little bit of a heads up, seeing as I've got these pieces I've already put together. All I'm going to do is I'm going to cut off a lot wider than I know I'm going to go when I put the piece on at the final end, just to take a little bit of the excess off, which I can then put through an extruder. So that will go back to sit to make another pendant. This will go on one side, and then I'm going to put together all these pieces, get them really nice and soft by rolling them in my hand until it's lovely and warm and soft, because when you're using an extruder, the softer the clay, the better it comes out of the extruder. Once it's nice and soft, I'm going to take my extruder. I've taken off the end bit, then unwind the back. Obviously your extruder might be slightly different to this, so just do whatever you need to do in your extruder. But it then opens up a place in the barrel. Roll your clay so it fits in, and I'm using the disc we mentioned earlier. So that just slots in the base of the extruder. Twist it on, nice and tight, and then I'm simply going to roll out, or squeeze out, excuse the squeaky noise, I'll probably sort of put it on silent in a minute, but basically I'm just going to extrude the clay out of this end. When you're done, just chop off the excess bits, and we're looking for a couple of pieces that are at least 6 inches in length, because we're going to go going round the outside of this, and of course that's 1 inch or 2.5 centimetres on each one. So we're looking for, say, 6 inches or 15 plus centimetres in length. So those bits can go to one side. So I'm just going to take my measuring sheet, and I'm actually going to go, I think I'll go for 8 to give myself a nice long extra piece. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And the same on that one. Same on that one. So I've got one piece that's going to go right next. So if you look on the one I've done earlier, I've got one piece that's going to go right next to the piece, and then the one piece that's going to go on the outside. And now it's just a case of making these into whatever colour you want to go. So I'm going to go silver. So I'm going to use, as I mentioned earlier, this gold finger, and all I'm going to do on my clean tile, having a wet wipe to hand, because this does get messy, I'm going to take a little bit on the end of my finger, smear it on 2 fingers, and then just very gently, with virtually no pressure, just rub it along the length of my piece. Once you've rubbed a bit, then you can start rolling very gently, and what you should find is that the silver will go completely and cover over the clay. Now you see, you don't need a lot to get nice coverage all the way along the length of your piece. Now I'm hardly touching it at all, but I will then go over, make sure that every side of it is nicely covered in the silver, and then I'll repeat exactly the same for this piece. And then wipe your hands and wipe away the residue. And by the time you've finished baking, your strands should be ready and dry enough to go around the outside. Of course, if you don't have any of the gilder's paste, you can always use alternatives. This one is just done with mica powder. That's actually a silver grey mica powder, which gives a nice effect. This one is one of those little pots that looks like it's silver, but comes out, it's got a nice sort of sheen colour on it, sort of like a bluey green sheen, which is nice. And you can, of course, always use the micro glitter. Again, just rolling your unbaked clay into that, and that gives a really glittery finish. So those are some options. I find personally acrylic paint doesn't stick very well to the clay in the unbaked state, and that's the state in which we're trying to use it for this particular project. But any of these will work. And of course, if you haven't got any mica powders, if you've got some old eyeshadow, some particularly sparkly pearly eyeshadow that you no longer want to use, so it's redundant, then you can always sort of scrape bits of that to make it nice and powdery, and use that as the mica powder to go over on top. Once your piece has finished baking, just remove it from the mould. Find the thick piece of the clay that you've made for the backing earlier, place it centrally down, and for this you'll probably have to pull it down around the sides, making sure it's going to stick nicely onto your form. Just gently persuade it down till it's completely stuck down. Get a smear of either PVA glue, or if you've got it, liquid clay gives you a really good result and acts much better. And then place your piece centrally down on top of the clay and press it in slightly so it's nicely adhered into the back. This is where our little strip of paper comes in, and as I say, I've measured that, it's about 1/2 centimetre, about 1/5 of an inch. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to lay it flat against one side, because I can then see with my tissue blade where I need to chop this clay off. Put it away and repeat round each side. So So there you have a nice neat border round your piece where each of the borders is the same size. So you could of course leave it there if you wanted, but because we've got our little strips of silvered clay, I'm going to add those around the outside. Now because we've covered this with something other than polymer clay, I'm just going to run a little bit of liquid clay with a small paintbrush all the way around the inner edges of our top piece so that it will sit nicely inside. If you haven't got liquid polymer clay, then obviously again a little bit of PVA glue would work just as well. Just wipe away any excess from on top of your piece. And then with your little silver outline, I'm going to just cut at a slight angle for a starting point. And that will be right at the base of one of our pieces. So you can see there it's just angled down. And then very gently with the back of your nail, just push this into place all the way around the outside of your patterned hexagon. Don't worry about the mess we're making, we'll clear that up in a minute. But gently push it round, persuade it nice and close till you get to your last piece. And on this piece you need to judge roughly where you're going to cut through at an angle again, so that when they go together they're going to join up nicely to create a nice band the whole way around the outside. And you can spend a little bit of time just persuading those slightly closer so that they actually join up round there. Then with a clean wet wipe or a clean cloth, wet cloth, just rub over the blue right up to the edge to take away any of the excess mess that's come and shows. Once it's all nice and neat and clear, then we're just going to repeat the process, running liquid clay around the outer edge just to put the second layer of that edging on. As before, just make sure you've got no liquid clay or glue on the surface, and also don't want too much spread across the bowl on the bottom, really just on that outside edge. And then exactly the same as before, get your second little strip, cut a little angle at the start, and I like to do it same place as I've done the top one, so that if one of them is messy you can always have that as like the bottom edge, or have it in the same place so the eye isn't drawn to two places where it might be slightly less well joined. And as before, very gently with the back of your finger just persuade the clay up against the edge. Drop down again. Neat up any edges, and when you're happy with it, just as before, bake covered in some aluminium foil to protect it in the oven in case the oven spikes, and bake according to the manufacturer's instructions for the brand of clay you are using. So once your piece is finished baking, just pop it off the mould, and then you need to decide what you want to do for the backing piece. So I'm going to make this into a pendant, so I could just do one little piece on the back to make it somewhere to hold, but because it's quite a large piece I'm going to do two pieces. So the first thing I need to decide is which way up I want the piece to go. So choose a side that you think looks nice. So I'm going to have this piece as the top bit, so I'm going to turn that over so I know that's the bit that's the top, and I've just rolled a little bit of the leftover blue clay into a sausage shape, and I'm just going to chop off a couple of pieces and roll those into balls too. If they're too big, so I think I might actually go smaller, always take one and chop it into two. With your paintbrush, again either with liquid clay or PVA glue, mark some dots either side of the point you want to be the top one. Now these need to be sort of equidistant, so that when you put your little rounds onto them. They're nicely spaced, and then either with your jump rings or with the little eyelet screws, I'm just going to push down into that. I'm going to add a little bit of liquid clay just round them, just to make sure they sit nicely down in. Press them down in, and then I'm going to check that they're equidistant from this point and about the same height down as well. So just have a quick check to make sure that when it hangs, it's going to hang nice and centrally. Once that's done, check on the front to make sure you haven't got any of your silvery prints or anything else, like glitter or anything else, on top. And you can just place it on the tile. I'm just going to put a little piece of card underneath just to keep it nice and off the tile, so not to create a shiny surface where it sits on the tile. So there we are. So the screws are put in sidewards so that I can then thread a nice strand through and have a hanging pendant. So there we go, there's our piece finished, apart from the last baking. So as before, cover the whole thing in aluminium foil and bake according to the manufacturer's instructions for the brand of clay you are using. And I'll bring you back when that one's done. So here's our finished piece. So all I've done to finish off, I put a nice gloss varnish on there, one of the ones that you use with polymer clay, and there's loads of different brands available. And on the back I just added a little bit more of the silver all over the back, just to make it into one smooth look on the back, and also did one single layer of non-glossy varnish on the back, just so it's got a nice matte finish. And that's now ready to make up into a pendant. As always, I'll show you a couple of other colour options. As you can see, this one is very similar to this pattern, but this one I chose one of the alternates instead. So on this one I used the cherry red and the apple green. This is the royal violet, and I've got a sunflower yellow in there as well. And the outline on this was the plum, and rather than using the plum I used the royal violet around the outside, and this time I used gold rather than silver. This one is very similar to the one I did in the actual main part of the tutorial, and this one was brilliant blue and raspberry, apple green, and then the peppermint again. And this one again I used the Windsor blue as the outliner and used that for the outside, and again this one was on silver. And just to show you the backs of these, this one I used jump rings rather than the little screws, so you can see I've literally just pushed them in and then just pushed the clay in over the jump ring so it's nicely secured. And on this one I simply drilled holes afterwards and put the screws in by themselves with a little bit of extra liquid clay, and just put those in. So there you go. There's some alternatives, just to show you different ways of doing the project. I hope you enjoyed that tutorial. Thank you so much for watching, and a special thank you for those of you who subscribe. I really do appreciate it. I think that's it for now. Hopefully I'll see you next time. Bye.